We're covering Georgia home buyers' guide to key definitions that I feel that you need to know. If you're thinking about buying a home and you're going to be a buyer or even a seller, but more specifically a buyer, you need to understand your purchase and sale agreement, and we're going to break it down in this video today. Let's get into it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if this is your first time on the channel, allow me to say hello and thank you so much for clicking on the video. My goal today is to provide you value, to understand what are some of the key terms that you need to know in your purchase agreement here for the state of Georgia. Before I do that, let me introduce myself to you and say hello. My name is Raymond, and I am a real estate broker here in Metro Atlanta, and I work with buyers and sellers that are looking to buy and sell real estate here in the Atlanta metropolitan area, as well as the entire state of Georgia. So if you need any of my assistance, even with renting as well, we do offer that service here with Magnetic Realty. So if you're interested in renting non-apartments, also feel free to get in contact with me. All of my contact information is in front of you, so I invite you to shoot me a call or shoot me a text, and let's get a consultation scheduled, and we'll get our process started working together. And if you are a frequent viewer or a subscriber, thank you so much for coming back to the channel and gaining some more insightful information about Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, suburbs, as well as tips and tricks on how to navigate buying and selling here in Georgia. All right, so let's get into the business at hand, which is going to be breaking down that guide to key contract definitions here for the state of Georgia. One of the things you need to understand is that in the United States, every state has its own real estate commission, its own real estate state laws. And so sometimes they differ. So if you're in New York, New Jersey, Florida, California, any other state outside of Georgia, when it comes to contracts and real estate, you could potentially feel a big difference in how we practice real estate here in Georgia versus where you are accustomed to, particularly if you've bought properties in those states before. All right. My goal is simple for today's video, which is to give you the ability to advocate for yourself through the strength of knowledge. Okay, it is important that you be able to advocate for yourself and be connected to the real estate transaction so that you know where you are every step of the way. So this is a teaching and learning video, so I do want you to grab your notepad and be ready to jot down your notes as we go along. Okay, I am gonna make sure that my speech is not too fast, so you don't have to keep rewinding the videos. I do know that I have a quick cadence. By nature, I've always talked quite quickly, so I will definitely temper my cadence to make sure that you're able to follow along with me. All right, so I'm going to be putting those key definitions on the screen as well as we go along and we talk about them. So without further ado, let's get into the learning. So I'm going to give you 9 definitions, okay? 9 key contract definitions that you need to know. We're going to start out first with the purchase agreement. What is the purchase agreement? Essentially, this is the instrument that operates your playbook on the terms that you have agreed to buy the property under. Okay, so things like price, closing dates, how much earnest money you're going to pay, how much contingency time you're going to have, and any other special stipulations that you're going to stipulate within your contract. So essentially, the purchase agreement is your overall instrument that details exactly what terms you're buying the property under. All right, so very important document. So essentially, it is the catalyst for this whole process. It is the #1 document that sets the precedence for everything else. Moving right along to the binding agreement date. The binding agreement date is essentially the date in which you, the buyer, and the seller agree to the terms of that purchase contract, that purchase agreement. All right, this is the date that both of you guys said yes to the same terms, and you are officially in agreement with each other, and the contract is executed and fully binding. All right, it is now a legal instrument that both of you have to operate under, and in the event that one person decides to do otherwise in that agreement, a default can be declared. This date also is the date that the time starts for all of your contingency dates, and we're going to get there, but just keep in mind that this is also the date that everything starts. So the time clock starts on the binding agreement date. Okay, so as we go along, I'll make references back to the binding agreement date so that you can wrap it all together. Okay, the next definition that I want to talk about is earnest money. Is the amount of money that you put forth up front before you close to show that you are serious about following the terms of the agreement that you've signed. In the event that you fail to follow the terms of that agreement, then that earnest money deposit that you've paid will be collected as liquidated damages and forwarded to the seller. So it is essentially acting as a predetermined liquidated damage that you're willing to risk in the event that you default, change your mind, start to go against what you said that you were going to do. All right. So that is earnest money. Now, earnest money also is credited back to you, the buyer, in the event that you follow through with the full contract. It will be credited to your bottom line closing cost amount at closing. So essentially you will get a credit back for that amount taken off of what you need to pay to close on the property or to gain possession or to buy the property. But at the end of the day, when the closing date happens, you will have a bottom line penny amount that you owe to purchase the property. That earnest money will be given credit towards that amount. Okay, so the money will always remain your money as long as you do not default on the contract. Okay, the next key term is closing attorney. The closing attorney is the party that is responsible for verifying that there are no liens or encumbrances towards the title of the property and that you can own the property totally without any interruption of full ownership. That is the key principle and job of the closing attorney. The second function that they have is to reconcile all debts and credits appropriately, as well as pay off any debts for the property, i.e. the existing mortgage. So if the seller has a mortgage on the property and that they're selling you, then the closing attorney will pay the mortgage off for them, the seller, so that way you can buy the property without that lien transferring to you. They will also ensure that taxation is current and make prorations based on ownership. So as it relates to the proration, depending on the time of ownership, the closing attorney will take the amount of time that the seller owned the property from the first of the year to the closing date. And then from the closing date beyond, the buyer will pay for that proration, okay, for that amount of time of ownership in the taxation. So everything will be prorated based on the time of ownership for each individual party. All right, so that's the core function of the closing attorneys. Now, one thing I do want to say about closing attorneys in Georgia that's different from, like, say, the state of New York or New Jersey, where each individual party has their own attorneys. In Georgia, we do not have individualized attorneys like buyer's attorneys and seller's attorneys. We typically only have one attorney generally in real estate transactions here in Georgia. Now, if you're dealing with commercial or convoluted structured deals, you may have your own attorney to draft certain amendments and exhibits, but it is very unusual in a typical real estate transaction for a buyer to go out and find an attorney and a seller to find an attorney. That's not how we operate here in the state of Georgia. But it's your prerogative if you want to hire an attorney to look over your documents for you. That is your right to have. But generally speaking, we only have one closing attorney in the state of Georgia per transaction, and those are their core functions. All right. So now let's move on to the next definition. And that definition is going to be possession date. Essentially, possession date is the date in which you will gain possession of the property, being able to move into it, have your keys, and ultimately take over the possession, the right to occupy the property. Now, possession date typically will happen on the same day of closing. But the reason I say typically, because going back to the purchase agreement, if you decide to give the seller more time to move out of the property, then your possession date may be a few days after your closing date, whatever the amount of time that you've agreed to give the seller. But essentially, that is what the possession date is. And all of these terms will be agreed upon at the time of negotiating that purchase agreement. Okay? Now, let's keep going. So the next contract definition I want to discuss is contingency. This one is going to be a little bit longer of a section because there are subsections within the overall section of contingency. So please follow along with me as we talk about it. So let me tell you what contingency means just generally. Contingency, the word itself, when it comes to real estate, contingency, right, means a period of time where your ability to terminate the contract is protected and your earnest money is refundable to you. So anything with a contingency wrapped around it protects your ability to terminate the contract without penalty, meaning that it was not a default. You had the right to terminate it. Plus, when you have the right, you can receive your earnest money back. So that is what the contingency means. Now, there are typically three types of contingencies in a residential real estate contract. The first type of contingency we have in the state of Georgia typically is a due diligence. Most of you will probably hear it as a right to inspect in other states, but here in Georgia, we call it the due diligence period. Essentially, that is when you need to do exactly that, your due diligence. You need to investigate the property, meaning do your home inspection, ensure that the inspection is satisfactory to you. Look at and canvass the neighborhood, verify the schools, verify everything about the property that you want to be 100% sure about. That is your period to do it, your due diligence period. So that is a protected contingency period. Okay. So in the event that any of your findings are unfavorable or you're not happy about what you found, you have the ability to terminate the contract without default and receive your earnest money deposit back payable to you. All right. The second contingency period that I want to talk about is the appraisal contingency period. Now, the appraisal contingency period works the same way in protecting your right to terminate, right? Because it says contingency at the end. So appraisal, contingency. The ability to terminate the contract in the event that the appraisal or the appraised value yielded a lower amount than what you agreed to pay for it. So if you agreed to pay $200,000 for the property and the appraisal or the appraised value revealed that the property is only worth $180,000, and if the seller is unwilling to reduce it to the appraised value of $180,000, then you have the right to terminate that contract and receive your earnest money back. So that is how that contingency for appraisal is enforced, and it protects your interest of ensuring that you're paying for a property that is worth what you're paying for. All right. So the final contingency is going to be the finance contingency. The finance contingency basically says you have the right to obtain a loan to finance the property. And in the event that you are denied for that loan within that contingency period, then you can terminate the contract and receive your earnest money back. All right. So those are the three major contingencies typically you'll find in a traditional real estate transaction here in the state of Georgia. All right. Now let's move on to our next definition. The next definition I want to talk about is appraisal itself. And I touched on it in the appraisal contingency, but I want to go a little deeper and tell you the functions and what your responsibility would be as a buyer. So again, as we discussed, the appraisal itself is the process of obtaining the true value of a property based on an appraiser's analysis of the property. That appraiser will return a report to the bank stating exactly what they feel the opinion of value of what the property is worth. Now, the goal is to ensure that we're buying a property that is worth what you're willing to pay for it. So the best case scenario for you is to have the appraisal to be equalized or greater than what you are willing to pay. Okay. Now, your responsibilities in the appraisal process is as follows. All you need to do is ensure that you have the payment for the appraisal. The bank, via your loan officer, will communicate to you, hey, we are ready now to order your appraisal. You will then submit your payment to your loan officer or your processor that works with the loan officer. That bank will then put in a request for an appraisal, and that request goes into the appraisal management system, AMS. AMS then does a round robin or just a random selection of an appraiser that covers that area of the subject property. Once that appraiser receives that bid or accepts the job, accepts the responsibility to submit the report, they will go out to the property and return the report. The loan officer will communicate with you as to what the appraised value was returned back to be, and then we will go from there. In the event that it is less, we would always keep you within that appraisal contingency. So that way, in the event that it is less than what you have agreed to pay for, you have that right to terminate that contract and not lose your earnest money. That is so very important. So that is the appraisal, and that is how your responsibilities in it, and that is how it is handled. Okay. Now let's move on to our next definition. The next definition I want to cover is a little bit of a convoluted one, and it may not apply to you. It's called contingency to sell. So this is when you, the buyer, own a property currently, and you're looking to buy another home, but you need to sell your current home in order for you to close and fully buy the new home. So this process is when the seller says, okay, I will allow you to sign an agreement with me. So enter into that purchase agreement, obtain a binding date, right? And then allow you to sell your home or put your home on the market. The contingency to sell is wrapped around a certain period of time that you and the seller agrees to. In the event that you have that allowed amount of time to sell your property. If you are unsuccessful in selling your property as the buyer, then that seller that you are in the purchase agreement with has the right to terminate your purchase agreement with them because you were unable to sell your house within the contingency to sell period. In some events, depending on your agreement, you could lose your earnest money with that seller. Okay. In some cases, you may not. It just depends on your terms in your agreement. But that is how the contingency to sell will work. And again, it is a way for you to go out and buy a property and then turn around and sell yours to get into the new property. So that contingency is there. I will tell you that it is somewhat difficult to structure deals that way. Not impossible, but it just depends on your market and what's going on at that given time. If we're in a very demanding season and there are tons of offers that do not have that contingency to sell wrapped around it, I'm just being honest with you, you're probably not going to fare well with coming in with the contingency to sell. However, that is the term and you need to be aware of it. Now, moving on to our final definition in today's video, and that is going to be temporary occupancy / agreement. So let's start by, and the reason I did the slash because I want to tell you what temporary occupancy is. It is the period of time that you, the buyer, will allow the seller to stay in the property after you guys have closed on the contract. Now, when does this come up? So this typically will arise when a seller tells you, hey, I've been living in this house 30 years. I'm gonna need a few days to get out of here once we close the deal. And so in some cases, the buyer will give that seller extra time to move out. And so when we do that in the state, we do have a separate operating agreement or an exhibit to the purchase agreement that goes in detail about the day and time in which the possession needs to be given. Some of the penalties in which if that does not happen, right? And who will bear the cost and the brunt of et cetera. All right. So that is the agreement part. So essentially the temporary occupancy is when the buyer gives the seller the right to continue to occupy the property, okay, beyond the closing date. And then the agreement essentially just puts everything in writing as to the terms, the day in which you're going to leave out, any penalties in the event that you don't, and who will cover any damages and cure any issues that may come up within that period of time. Okay. So I hope that this video has given you some insight, and I hope that you now can advocate for yourself and have a general understanding of where you are in all of these different definitions. And when you're in these periods of time, i.e. the contingency periods, you know that you are protected and why you're protected and all of that stuff, okay? In my humble opinion, being able to win in real estate is the ability to be connected to the knowledge aspect of the industry. When you know what you're doing, you're more confident and you're secure in knowing that what you're aiming for is within view and you will be successful. That is why you hire a realtor to take you on that journey, because we understand the process, we understand the documentations that are necessary to ensure that you are protected. All right. So in the event that you're looking to buy a property here in Metro Atlanta or the entire state of Georgia, and you have not located an agent to work with you as of yet, I would invite you to give me a call. Let's schedule a consultation and let's discuss how we could work together on your journey. I would love to hear about what your goals are, and if we are a good fit, we can execute that buyer brokerage agreement and we can get started and working together. I appreciate your time today. I appreciate the opportunity to empower you to be able to advocate for yourself. And so if you need me, I'm here, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next video. Also, hit the like button if you enjoyed it, and hit the subscribe button to become a part of the family here at Atlanta Georgia Living. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.